Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the first B.L.O.K Sports Show for the year 2021. I hope and pray that everyone is doing well on today and that in all that is going on, everyone is also staying safe more than anything else. I tell you what, I'm looking forward to this year. We have 2020 in our rearview mirror, and I tell you what, thank God. I know it's been kind of a harrowing year for a lot of individuals. And but guess what? We're back in town. We're back in for the new year, and we're looking forward to just having another wonderful time and talking about the best thing in the world. We're going to talk about HBCU sports. What better topic on God's green earth is there to talk about other than HBCU sports? I don't know a better topic. I mean, you may think of some others, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm an HBCU grad. The individuals that I have on my show, either HBCU grads or they work at an HBCU. And I tell you what, there's nothing better in the world as far as I'm concerned than to be in that position. So welcome everyone, and let's go to one of my compadres here, and this is Dr. Cavill. And Dr. Cavill, welcome. Happy New Year.
Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year to you and all of our viewers.
Yes, I tell you what. So how are you on this fourth day of 2020? I'm going to give you the floor right now to say Happy New Year to everyone that's out there. So I'm just going to open up the floor for you to just go ahead and say what you want right now for this new upcoming year.
I'm doing well. First thing I'll say, I did have my black eyed peas because obviously somebody in 2020 did not do their part and have their black eyed peas. So I doubled down and actually had them twice. Very good. I'm excited about that. And as you mentioned in the opening, looking forward to 2021 and seeing things become in a much better place than we were ending in 2020. But with that, I certainly want to say condolences and prayers to all those that were lost in 2020.
That's right.
Want to say congratulations for those that found a way to move forward in 2020 and make it as great as possible. And I hope that was for more people than not. But I think I would be remiss if I really didn't pay homage to those that are not with us and able to move forward. With that, the other thing, and I'll talk about it, that just, is amazing in so many different ways, and it's giving my attention, is seeing that blueness in your shirt in the announcement of Phi Beta Sigma with the 1914.
Yes.
And it just blows me away. But with all kidding aside, I know you are a proud member of a great fraternity.
As are you.
And one that happens to be a member that was open to African Americans, but has always been open to all individuals for that matter, but has a foundation in servicing the community like all of our pan-Hellenic fraternities and sororities that we preferably call as Black Greek letter organizations. But with that, just wanted to acknowledge that and congratulations for being a part of a great organization and moving things forward.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you very much. And don't forget your heritage as well. Can you, that's right, FIA. So can you speak more to your heritage and with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. So
No doubt about it. I happen to be a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, known by most as the first Black Greek letter organization established on a college campus. In our case, a historically white college campus, but also was the first in terms of its second charter chapter, Beta, was founded at Howard University, historically Black college and universities. And so just enthralled about the history associated with Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. I seek to live up to the motto in my daily lives, like we do in all of our Greek fraternities. As you say, Greek letter is the way I like to refer to them in so many different ways. But just living up to the legacy as we continue to push forward in the vanguard of African Americans and Africans really throughout the entire diaspora as we seek to make the world a better place.
And this is the one thing that we're not just doing lip service here on B.L.O.C. Sports. Not only do we talk about HBCU sports, but we also live it. Not just the sports side, but from the HBCU side, we also live it. Each of us.
Great point.
Yes.
I had a opportunity to be on the show that, as you sure heard, as many people out there about FAMU releasing their SWAC Fall 2021 football schedule.
Yes.
As we all know by now, means that they will be a full member of the Southwestern Athletic Conference,
Yes.
founded historically, as we talk about history, in terms of 1920. That was right around the same framework when we talk about 1906 Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, as you talk about 1914.
That's right.
And those organizations that were founded in between those times in terms of Omega Psi Phi and Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity in terms of 1911, with both of those great organizations in themselves, along with making sure that Shiri's not dead when we talk about the sororities of Alpha Kappa Alpha in terms of 1908, Delta Sigma Theta in terms of 1913, along with Zeta Phi Beta 1920, and then Sigma Gamma Rho 1922. Hopefully I'm not off on that particular date there, but I believe that is accurate. I'm sure somebody will rightfully let me know if I'm off on that. But the point that I'm trying to make is that was that a renaissance when you started talking about these organizations, and that is not even including like the NAACP around that time frame as well. The Urban League, just to give you an indication of what the impetus was in our community to provide a holistic opportunity in the growth in educational attainments through these organizations was really a vanguard at that time. The reason I circle it back is you talked about how we live it. On that is the VP of Intercollegiate Athletics at Florida A&M University, known to many of us as FAMU.
Yes.
Courtney J happens to be a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. So I teased in the communication among some of the other great comments that were coming out there. One thing that was interesting to me, I do a bi-weekly Zoom session with members of the fraternity that I've grown close with. These are not necessarily just our chapter members, as you know, as we have graduate chapters where we do a lot of the work, but these are folks that I've come across during the year. And it was unique when I created this conversation through GroupMe and tweets, where it happened to be that all the members in this particular happened to be two things. They were members of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, and they happened to be all individuals that went and graduated from an HBCU. But in that, the conversation came up that I had a stint where I lived in Huntsville, Alabama. Folks that are familiar with that, that will resonate as you talk about Alabama A&M University.
Yes.
Shout out to my wife, who was a Bulldog, where I fell in love with her up there in that area. But obviously, you imagine I met the fraternity brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha up there, and many of them I've kept up with. And so we were just talking about in this bounty about how we were talking to making a trip from FAMU, and I was teasing him, saying, "Hey, FAMU will be on your campus on this date. Do you see that?" He said, "Yeah, I was doing that," and he had a member of Beta Nu, which is the chapter at Florida A&M University, and the members at B.L.O.C.K over there in terms of what that looks at Jackson State, the Alpha chapter there.
Yes.
So we got into this, and so I teased him and brought it onto the show and said, "Hey, you talk about the rich culture, and so I started not talking about Alpha Phi Alpha, but I just named the undergraduate chapters. And so somebody that is into that recognize that, and so that's gleefully how we will play with one another, if you would. And he caught it obviously quite quickly, and it was a laughter to other folks because they figured it out in time, but we're not, on top of it reticently. But it was done in the spirit of the culture, what I call the HBCU sports culture, which includes the Panhellenic. So you're absolutely right when you talk about what does that look like. And so that's just another example of where you talk about not only the general fans of Alabama A&M and Florida A&M talking about the schedule, but Grambling getting on to FAMU about the being homecoming, whatever that's worth. Jackson State kicking it off in Miami, and so you get the friendly that battle going back and forth of what that looks like. So just wanted to share a little bit to give a specific example of what you talk about with the HBCU sports culture.
Now, since we're on the subject of football, yes, that is a quite interesting setup that Florida A&M actually did by having Grambling on homecoming. Out of all the schools that you would have for homecoming, I can understand a Mississippi Valley. No disrespect, first off. No disrespect to a Mississippi Valley or a UAPB or even one of the Alabama schools, but Grambling for homecoming?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and a lot of people are bringing that up. But if you take a deeper dive, there's two things, and I think this is intriguing because some people may learn about this a little bit.
Okay.
In that, because I know in some ways you're teasing a little bit there, but I think it's an opportunity to give some people the information. But if you look at their schedule, the two games after Grambling are on the road. They play Southern Arkansas Pine Bluff.
Yes.
Well, guess what? The two games before that are also on the road in the SWAC, which are respectively Alabama A&M and Mississippi Valley State.
Yes, that's
true. So
true.
they traditionally have their homecomings in late October. The only date they had
was that game.
Been against a home game against Grambling, or you talking about pushing the homecoming all the way back to the 1st of October, 10-9. And remember the conference, schedules.
Yes.
Institutions don't have control of that. There are some mitigations where you can kind of communicate back and forth, but even to complicate it more, to give some people the indications of homecoming is not just a decision that the Department of Athletics makes. Now, they may have some information in it, but it's student affairs and oftentimes the president's office that actually dictates when homecoming is.
Yes.
In terms of the calendar and what they're trying to achieve. And as you know, historically, a lot of homecomings are pretty much set in a certain period of time. For example, Alabama A&M that I mentioned earlier, they have one of the earliest homecomings is September, usually mid to late September. And they do that specifically because they have the unique Magic City Classic, which is always the last week in October. And they did it over a period of time, and it's become part of their history from the standpoint that they didn't want to put two games that they knew grew financially where they had two games in October. So they decided, let's split it up. You do one in September, one in October, and it kind of allows folks to spread the wealth, if you would, in terms of making plans about having one big event per month early in the football season. So those are some things to consider, that it's more than just somebody saying, oh man, we're gonna put Grambling on the schedule. So there's a lot going there while it's interesting and entertaining for us to talk about.
Oh yes.
For those that may not be aware of that, I thought that would be something nice to share to give people a little more indication that it's not just so clear as the fact that you just have the disingenuous idea of saying, hey, we're gonna put Grambling on the schedule to disrespect them.
Yeah.
And over the years, the last thing I'll add, over the years, you've had fans that have kind of pushed back about playing a opponent that is supposed to be an easy victory. And that kind of goes back and forth because you have some coaches and ADs over the years that have talked about, man, we're going to put somebody on the schedule we can have a better chance of thinking that we can win. But you've had some fans that said, hey, I want more games on campus. I want competitive games on campus. Yes, I want us to win, but I'd rather have a really good game to celebrate for homecoming than just the game that we're going to potentially blow somebody out, whether it's a conference game or a non-conference game that I've seen set up. So there's a lot of give and take and tug in terms of what you're looking at. But to your point, ultimately, the FAMU Grambling game on paper seems something that should be very exciting.
It's going to be a great game.
Battle in terms of what that contest could be like, and which is the reason, ultimately, like FAMU, among the other things, decided to join the Southwestern Athletic Conference. I will say this as the last thing before I pass the mic back to chime in. Really, though, when you bring in a FAMU and Bethune-Cookman in terms of this 10-member conference, you're not running away from anybody. Everybody's schedule is going to be tough.
Yes.
And so whether you play a team at home or on the road, whether it's for homecoming or whatever, you better bring your lunch pail. You better be ready to get it. Because just as you allude to it, the game after they play Grambling is Southern University. And so there's no breaks on that schedule.
There are no
whatsoever.
breaks. And a lot of people may look at, and that's why I was wholeheartedly mentioning no disrespect to Mississippi Valley, because Mississippi Valley, in that game that I watched them play Jackson State, even though they eventually lost that game, but the one thing I can easily say about Valley is that those guys are scrappy. Those guys play to the last second. And if you make a mistake against Valley, well, against any team in the SWAC, then I can promise you, you will lose that game. And that's what a lot of people don't understand about the SWAC. I cannot say that very same thing about the MEAC, even though I've only watched some of the higher level schools. Maybe you can go and take a deeper dive into that about the bottom half of the MEAC as opposed to the bottom half of the SWAC. A question for you with that, because you being the historian.
Yeah,
which one? Which do you think?
I may be a little biased myself in terms of so much of my energy being spent on the Southwestern Athletic Conference.
Yeah, same here.
I've had a great opportunity to really study the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, and for that matter, SIAC and CIAA, to kind of throw them in there in terms of, the rivalries and matchups. But to your point, in a lot of ways, the MEAC has been top heavy. And in most recent year, top heavy enough where they've been arguably the best conference in terms of HBCU sports, directly related to what they've been able to do in the Celebration Bowl, and a little bit, people, if you go back further enough, even what they did in the later years in terms of the Heritage Bowl.
Right.
Some people may question that a little bit, that you had different matchups in terms of the strength of teams in the Heritage Bowl, unlike what you get with the Celebration Bowl, where you essentially get the champions playing against each other, which is a different indication in terms of what touches all. Right. Some people will add to the fact that hasn't necessarily been a conference thing. That's been more of a North Carolina A&T Aggies thing. To that point, and shout out to the Aggies out there, as they will start journeying and moving on, as we talked about FAMU and Bethune-Cookman, for that matter, joining the SWAC. They're moving out of the MEAC and joining the Big South. So we'll get to quickly see what that looks like, as we've seen Hampton the year before last do their round in the Big South. That didn't go very well in terms of football, at least from that matter.
Yes.
But with that said, specifically to your point in terms of the matchups, yes, I feel there's a much bigger gap between the top teams in the MEAC than the bottom teams in the MEAC. Those teams do not necessarily jump up and get the proverbial upset that we see a little more often in the SWAC in terms of a team to team.
Yes.
But I will say that they may be a little deeper in the middle of the conference in terms of what you see with the MEAC middle teams jumping up and really being able to get a victory over the top teams. We've seen that with Morgan State specifically over the last 2 years, beating North Carolina A&T. You've seen that even when South Carolina State, as they were building back and FAMU looked like they were pushing themselves back to the top of the conference. They would have a hiccup in regards to South Carolina State. You saw that with Bethune-Cookman as they really had the conference by the ears in the first of the decade that we just closed out in terms of Jenkins during this era, but as they moved forward, they fell in terms of the middle of the pack. They're being able, a team that has given some upsets to those teams at the top of the conference over the last couple of years. That's been Florida A&M, North Carolina A&T, and North Carolina Central. They've been able to kind of throw a monkey wrench with somebody along with South Carolina State to making things really interesting. So I would say maybe in the middle of that pack, things have been a little more interesting when you always have a team or two. Howard, their short foray when they had Coach London before he left, gave some teams some problems as they were moving from the bottom to the middle and pushing towards the upper part of that conference. So that's just to give you an example of some of the teams out there. With Norfolk State being another one of those teams that's been in the middle of the pack and haven't quite been able to get over the hill to close up to get to maybe that top third of the conference you would, but they've been able to give some teams nightmares in terms of really making a difference in terms of who finishes at the top of the conference. So yes, the summation, the bottom part of the SWAC seems to always give somebody a fit in terms of a major upset. And you don't see that in the MEAC, more in the middle of the conference that does that year to year.
Now, let's go back. You were talking about some of the games that are coming up between the SWAC and our newly inaugurated schools that are coming over to the SWAC conference, Bethune as well as Florida A&M. You have Florida A&M is renewing an old tradition of the Orange Blossom Classic with Jackson State. And that used to be a game that was played quite often with Jackson State and Florida A&M, and they introduced a couple of other schools in there, but it was mainly between Jackson State and Florida A&M. In terms of history, do you have any history to impart upon us? Now I can say this much, even though Jackson State has not had great success within the last several years of their football program, but the one thing that they have had is success against Florida A&M. They've defeated them the last 2 out of the last 3 games that they've played, with an 18-16 victory, if I'm not mistaken, 2 years ago. And now here they are, they're renewing their traditions against each other in the Orange Blossom Classic, and it'll be very interesting to see whether or not Jackson State still has the upper hand as they have within the last couple of years. So now,
great point, especially with the new coach, Coach Prime, coming on board. To your point, though, when Willie was a head coach at Prairie View A&M University or the offensive coordinator at Alcorn State, he was 6-0 against Jackson. So
yes,
Jackson
he was.
is starting to kind of turn the tides in terms of those last couple of wins that had FAMU. Only one of them was with Willie Simmons as the head coach. The other one was Coach Holmes before he was dismissed for the program. But to your point, that game is really shaping up to a great interest. I think it's intriguing that Coach Willie Simmons has indoctrinated himself to be familiar with starting out conference play with a game, in this case, an Eastern Division game, which is similar to what he did with Texas Southern and Prairie View in the Labor Day Classic. That game happened to be 2 rivals, but the fact that you go with that, while Jackson State and Florida A&M have not been conference rivals, if you would, right?
That's right.
They have been rivals in terms of their championship pedigree.
Similar to Jackson State and Tennessee State. Just wanted to interject that real quick. But
Correct.
go ahead.
Those programs have been in the pecking order over many years in terms of being those programs that have really fall at the top, along with Grambling, Southern, and Prairie View when you go back to the 50s and 60s.
Yes.
You'd have to throw in some South Carolina States during those years, as well as Alcorn State over a period of time, and even Morgan State when you get into it. Those teams in terms of what we perceive as the FCS programs.
Yes.
Not leaving out those SIACs and CIAAs. Obviously, Howard, when you talk about opening up the decade, where many of your private schools, such as Wiley College, really dominated the landscape, kind of opening things up until you get into the 60s and the 70s, where the public schools start reigning supreme in terms of the change in the landscape, just to give you some history in terms of what that looks like. But specifically talking about Jackson State and FAMU, I think that's going to be a fascinating matchup in just so many different ways of what that looks like. But the one that always sticks out to me, that matchup, not necessarily in the Orange Boston Classic, as there's been some classic games, as both of them have won games that have led to both programs winning national black college championships. But the one that sticks into me was not necessarily for a championship, although many people argue that it was the de facto championship game when you had the inaugural, at the time, 1AA playoffs, when you had FAMU and Jackson State facing off in the semifinal. When FAMU went up there and played in Jackson and got out of there with a well-earned, narrow victory. Where they ultimately went on to beat UMass for the 1AA national championship. That's the game that was fascinating to me because sold-out stadium, so many expectations, such newness in regards, as I said, the inaugural 1AA, and people would not believe it if you told them now that that would be the only HBCU that has won a championship, literally playing for a championship at the 1AA or now FCS level. Many things that we can talk about of why that is. But going back to that game, there's just so much history, so much great players in that game. And as many people would tell you, that was the championship game, that whoever came out of that would have ultimately defeated UMass and won a championship. In historic footnotes, everybody will let you know it was what will now become a conference rivalry game. Florida A&M defeating Jackson State.
I have to admit, that was a great game. I was only 2 years old at the time. And how old were you? You may have been 3 years old at the time, right? Maybe two at the time.
I'm not going to tell anybody. I think older than that. I was 7 or 8. In terms of what that game looked like. And unfortunately wasn't like many of the Florida, Mississippi fans were able to find my way to that game. But as I've become an HBCU historian, as you talk about, many people say the dean of HBCU Sports. Because of the research that I do and the information I try to provide, I've really had a great opportunity to really dive in there and really revisit that game in my memory in terms of what it must have been for all the fans there to partake in that and be able to put that in terms of the vessel of history. So kudos for all those that were involved in that matchup, and let's hope that 2021 will be everything that matchup was.
My uncle was sports information director at the time for Jackson State University, and his name, of course, is Sam Jefferson. And he was sports information director, and I can tell you just the hype around that particular game during that time was just unbelievable. And everyone, even though Jackson State ended up losing that game, and they looked at what Florida A&M did to UMass, they said, man, if we could have, and I cannot remember, I'd have to go back and look at I'm quite sure my uncle could tell you almost play by play what actually transpired. And, but I can almost tell you, I know there was one instance in that particular game. I know we're going back, and yes, we are going to get to basketball, but I know there was one instance in that particular game that Jackson State had the opportunity to win, and I cannot remember if it was a turnover or what actually transpired, but they just said, what if? And that was just one of those games where Jackson State has been very close, or they've been right there, and they just didn't make it over. And that was just one of those instances where Florida A&M, they just came in, they won the game, and they took the next step and won the national championship. And that was perhaps one of very few games where you had two HBCUs that actually participated in the FCS playoffs. You've had Mississippi Valley
Yeah,
and
that
Alcorn. Yeah.
is in terms of NAIA,
Mm-hmm.
especially in football, that's the only occurrence that I can recall. And I looked at there are a couple of times in NAIA during the era when Central State was winning championships, where they were like
Yes.
where Pine Bluff was like one game away,
Yep.
where that matchup would have happened like in the semifinals, quarterfinal round.
Yes.
You've had that a couple of years at the 1AA FCS. But that was the only time on the football side where you've seen
Two HBCUs playing.
HBCUs match up in terms of the playoffs. You've seen it happen a couple of more times in the NIA on the basketball side, where you had teams face off in terms of the quarterfinals and semifinals.
Yes. I remember.
In terms
Yeah.
of with that, with many of those teams where they really dominated the first decade when they joined the NIA, winning championships in terms of the 60s, when you talked about 7 of 11-year period when you had HBCUs winning the NIA basketball championships, which has actually been more successful on a national level than what we've done in football, which shocks a lot of people when I tell them that, because they think about the HBCUs specifically in the South so much as football, but basketball is where you've seen the national success, and it was all during the time with the NAIA, and you've also seen it on the track and field side as well.
Yes, that is so true. That is so true. And I tell you what, we're just
Both
looking.
men's and women's.
We're looking back, and I guess this is a very good time to actually look back at the heritage and the history of HBCU sports in general, because we have a rich heritage, and this is the one thing that we miss. And I think as we look at the table, I guess tables being turned is a bad connotation, but I would say as we have individuals that are coming back to HBCU schools to play, we will see whether or not we have what was the renaissance of the 60s and the early 70s, where you had a lot of African Americans graduating from HBCU colleges and universities, going on to the next level and playing in the pros. Because as one of our colleagues stated, Mr. Lute Williams, we had 68 graduates to be drafted from HBCUs in 1970 to go on to play in the NFL. Now the question is, with the recruits that Jackson State now has from all over the country now, and now with Grambling, A&T, Florida A&M now has some 3-star recruits. It's going to be kind of interesting just to see now in the next 3 to 4 years whether or not we can recapture some of that, instead of just having one draft choice or one individual that was drafted in 2019 from Tennessee State. So it'll be interesting to see in the next 4 years. And this is something I think would be great for us to start tracking now, starting in, with the draft of 2021 and perhaps probably the draft of 2022, who will come out of the draft from an HBCU standpoint. So it'll be interesting to see where we stand from those new draft choices and from what's going on, because with what Coach Prime has done, a lot of people and a lot of individuals are saying, great, we don't care about what's happening over at Jackson State. It's fine that they have all of the quote unquote noise that's actually occupying a lot of the news that's going on. But the other thing is now is that you still have, with all of the social unrest that is also taking place, a lot of eyes are now seeing that if you really want someone to really truly care about you, and I will go here, is that you need to go to an HBCU. And I'm going to stand on that unapologetically, and because I went to an HBCU, and you being a on the faculty, a member of the faculty, the things that you do to your students are a lot different than an individual at a historically white college or university. Because as a faculty, the one thing that I noticed is that you hold us accountable. And I remember my instructors. They held us accountable. They didn't care if we had a football game. They didn't care if we had another event outside of what we had to do in the classroom. The bottom line is, I still remember when Jackson State was in its heyday, and I'll say this and then we can move forward. When Jackson State was when Jackson State was in their heyday of football in the early to mid 1980s, we had a specific instructor that said, I don't care, and we had great football players in my class. I don't care what time your bus leaves. I don't care what time you have to be on the field. If you don't do my homework, you won't even play in the game because I will make sure that I send your grades to the coach and you will not be allowed to play. And those were some of the things that actually transpired at a Jackson State. And I'm quite sure you can say pretty much the same thing for what you've done at Texas Southern, and also some of your faculty members that you work with as well.
Yes, I certainly would like to believe that. Like I said, I'll be upfront on this part. I'm certainly biased about what we do at HBCUs, specifically certainly what I do about HBCUs, about the mothering approach in terms of really building up students in terms of a level of confidence they can go out and literally change the world. But to your point, we talked about a little bit with the book over here over my shoulder, where we talk about Stan Wright, great track coach over at Texas Southern University, stories of African-American pioneer. And then the book that I co-edited here, we talk about and show out some things in terms of the athletic experience and history of Black college and universities, past, present, and persistence. Yeah. That I co-edited and wrote a chapter in here that really talks about that history.
As a matter of fact,
focus on that and have a chapter in, as you talked about the Renaissance era.
Can you get that
chapter in there talking about the Golden Age? So
now,
I talk about
let me interrupt
what
you.
that looks like in terms of the culture and the history.
Let me interrupt you real quick, and I want you to continue. Can you still get that book online?
Yeah, you can get it. It's a textbook, so
and the reason why,
it's a little expensive because of the textbook, but I think for those that really are into the history, it's valuable from that perspective, because one of the reasons is so expensive because it really goes in that detail. And like I said, I have a chapter on the history, but just to give you some indications, just for edification purposes, since you asked that, it does open up talking about the historical overview, the origins of education of Black individuals and what that looks like with the evolution of historically Black colleges. And then I talk a little bit more about specifically the history from an athletic experience of what that looks like. Chapter in here about revenue producing sports, athletic migration experiences of Black athletes, economic issues of HBCUs, where you look at legal issues, Black female athletic collegiate experiences, HBCU classics, economic state of HBCUs and their athletic programs is in here. Separate, unequal, and irrelevant in terms of HBCU revenue sports. And then we have even a recommendation for future HBCU athletic programs, financing HBCU athletics, men's basketball problems and opportunities, Black college athletes, the sporting life of HBCUs, essential factors for restoring academic athletic excellence at HBCUs. So it's a lot of work. It's written by academic professors, both in terms of those that are historically Black colleges and those that are historically white colleges. But a lot of information in there from that perspective, and kind of wanted to share the details in terms of why you asked me a little bit about my experience at the program level, where I was fortunate about being the professor that really pushed and was able to get off the ground with some help with a lot of other individuals about our BS in Sport Management program at Texas Southern University, which was followed by our MS, our Master's of Science in Sports Studies and Sports Leadership. And so we're trying to be on the vanguard of allowing students to understand that they can be part of sports, but they can do it not just being on the field, but off the field. And then we have a unique way we put the purpose and mission part of our program is to really look at the diversity and inclusion. And we look at it from individual perspectives of individuals being diverse and getting into organizations and understanding. And we even do it from another unique perspective, which is an institutional framework, which you don't really see programs look at out there, even when they talk about diversity and inclusion from the framework. And so we specifically look at what we call critical sports studies, or HBCUs, critical sports studies, where we look at HBCUs from a critical sports studies framework, where we specifically ground our program of projects that you do that look at the unique framing and cultural, the sporting HBCU diaspora of HBCU athletic programs. So really proud about that. Last thing I'll kind of talk about this, that we are at the final stages. I need a final signature, if you would, but really close from a provost office perspective of becoming the first HBCU and really one of the first programs in the country where we offer a doctorate in terms of a concentration. Concentration in sports education. It'll be in our curriculum and instruction doctoral of education program, where you can literally get a concentration in sports education, where you can build up a certificate program and do executive doctoral certificates in athletic administration, or an executive doctoral certificate in sports leadership, which can fold into the concentration and move you into the doctoral program. And so that's where we at with that program.
That's good to know. That's very good to know. So thank you very much for that information. So very good. So and with that, let's go ahead and move on to, so we'll be talking later. So let's go ahead and move on to basketball. We've been alluding to basketball and all sorts of other sports since we've been here, and it's just been great. And thank you, by the way, thank you very much for taking the time to just do a look back on HBCU sports, because this is one of the things that we try to make sure that we give you. We give you everything that's happening today, but we also give you a look back, just in case you may not be aware, or just in case we just want to bring up tidbits of history for you in terms of why things are where they are today. And with all of that being the case, we just want to make sure that everything you have and everything that is for you, that you have, and you get your information. And so with that being the case, as I switch over here, I want to share my screen as we get ready to talk about basketball. And we go back in to take a look at some of the scores. And it seems like I may have closed out my actual program, but let me get that back up for you again. But as I do that, because of COVID-19, the one thing I can say, as you see some of the scores that are scrolling below for everyone, but the one thing I can easily say is because of COVID-19, we've had a lot of games that have been canceled. We just got into conference play. And because of COVID-19, a lot of the conference games are now being canceled. And so this is one of those things that we must be aware of, that as we get into play here, that this is something for us to really, really be aware of, that this is going to happen. And so as we take a look here at these scores, we will see that some of these games, it's just a short schedule, and it's just a short number of games that's being played. Now, the first couple of dates, as we can see here, December 28th, there were a couple of games scheduled, and actually Edward Waters should have been on December 30th as well. But we only have just a couple of games that were played. Edward Waters did play back-to-back on December 28th and December 29th, but we do have them listed here. And as we take a look at the scores on December 28th, we have Edward Waters losing to University of St. Francis by a score of 73 to 99. And then the second game that they actually played, which was played on the 29th, I apologize for the error, they actually played Taylor University, and they lost by a score of 75 to 66. And on December 30th, you had Alcorn playing the number 2 team in the country, and they traveled to Baylor University, your neck of the woods, Dr. Cavill, and they ended up losing to Baylor by a score of 105 to 59. Conference play with the SWAC started on December 30th, and now you have Texas Southern playing Prairie View, and they ended up defeating Prairie View by a score of 66 to 61. Grambling ended up winning against Alabama State by a score of 66 to 49. Mississippi Valley took it on the chin again, and they lost to UAPB by a score of 92 to 52. And Delaware State, they're not in conference play yet in the MEAC. They ended up losing to Manhattan by a score of 65 to 59. Tell you what, Mississippi Valley, they are not doing so well in terms of their basketball program. I hope Lindsey Hunter can really turn that program around, but right now he has to do a better job in terms of recruiting. In terms of any of these games, Grambling seems to be doing quite well in the SWAC conference in terms of out of state as well, out of conference as well as conference play. So any comments on any of these games, Dr. Cavill?
The only one I want to jump out there is you got the Texas Southern. I think that's the actually TCU, Texas Christian University game that they played, where they played really well in that game. They had a couple of players, because of COVID protocols, did not play in the game, and TCU was actually also probably without their best player as well. But there was a nip and tuck
TCU
and close, and held themselves well in terms of playing a Power 5 school. So I wanted to give that update. That's my understanding. That's Texas TCU instead of Texas Southern. That conference game will be played in the next coming up week.
Okay. Thank you.
Baylor is the number 2 team in the conference in the country. Last reported, so you understand what Alcorn State was up against.
Yes.
On the road, and so you can see as the first-year coach is looking to get some things done in regards to before we get into SWAC conference play. You have Edward Waters, as you talked about that, having a tough week as they were on the road for those 2 games, and you know it's always tough to go on the road and win.
Yes.
They played tough in those games, but couldn't get in any victories in terms of that. Then you have that other non-conference game with Delaware State. That's a game that I was looking closely at. Those are 2 FCS pro teams, low majors, some people would call them in terms of what that looks like, but peer-to-peer. And so you were hoping that Delaware State could get that victory. They played them relatively close, but
yes, they did.
Particularly being on the road, but couldn't quite get it done. So you see Delaware State trying to continue to move forward. In terms of conference play, Grambling State and Alabama State, Grambling was on the road, picked off where they are playing well as they got a non-conference Division I win. Alabama State did not play non-conference games because of
COVID-19.
They did not want to go on the road and deal with that. And you can see that They were trying to get their legs in that game. They played close pretty early. It was kind of back and forth, and then Grambling went on a run, and Alabama State could not get it back in there. So Mo Williams, in terms of his inaugural game, got a welcome to the SWAC, and so it'll be interesting to see what's going on there. The top recruit that they thought they would have in did not play, and you didn't see his name on the literature, so it'll be interesting to see what is going to be taking place there. You had that rivalry game between Mississippi Valley State, UAB. Valley is really struggling.
Yes, they are.
Second year in a row, really playing hard. Anytime you get beat by 40 points within the conference, as you've seen them struggling outside of the conference with scores like that, but to do that in the conference tells you that you have some major issues. Obviously, it's a long conference race, so we'll see what takes place there.
Yes.
But that has to be major concern for the Delta Devils. For Lindsey Hunter, a great player in the SWAC, obviously playing in the NBA at the professional level and actually winning
2
a
championships
championship in the NBA.
Yes.
Is not having his way with being the head coach of Valley. Now, that's a strong program in regards, or struggling program, I should say, in terms of scholarships, but they got increased scholarships, and it still does not seem to be paying dividends. So to give you some indication there, I did want to add in that you did have some MEAC games coming in, and that may be on your next slide in terms of some conference games that were played on Saturday and Sunday, in terms of what that looked like. And so North Carolina has gotten off to a great start in conference. They've played the most games of any HBCUs on the men's side. They've played literally 13 games, and it looks like it's boding well for them as they went on the road in terms of that matchup, playing South Carolina, and they're playing back-to-back games in the MEAC, unlike what you see in the SWAC, where you're doing more of the traditional schedule for the 18 games. So you had a game on Saturday and Sunday where North Carolina A&T came from behind on the game on Sunday to get it done, but won pretty solidly on Saturday in terms of what that looks like. So I thought that was interesting. You had on the women's side, Howard and Morgan, as we see Morgan State men playing James Madison and getting a big victory in terms of getting it done. As Norfolk State beats James Madison too. So MEAC has done well against James Madison this year. So it'll be interesting to see what's going on. But as I was saying a little bit, just on the women's side, you had Morgan State and Howard play conference games back to back, and they split. Howard winning the first one, but Morgan State getting a little bit of revenge in the second matchup, as you see there. But then you move on to Talladega playing at number 17, getting a victory over Lyon College. So they continue to show why they're ranked as a top 20 team at the NIA level. But then had a tough matchup against the top 5 Arizona Christian team that they were not able to get the victory on the road in both of those matchups. So going 1-1 on the road is something that you think is a positive indicator, although I'm sure they wanted to avail themselves much better in that top 20 matchup when they played number 5 Arizona Christian. This past Sunday.
Yes. These were some great matchups, but I tell you what, there were so many other games that were canceled within this week.
When you get into the cancellation, that's a great point. You bring that up, and I didn't get a chance to speak up that early, although you kind of led off with that. That's something that you're going to see the rest of the season, in my opinion. You've seen it for those that got out there and played football all fall. You've seen cancellations, even to one of the teams that's going to be playing on with Ohio State, that some people didn't even think they should be in the playoffs because they were only playing 5 regular season games and got in the championship game to get their 6th victory to go 6-0.
But look at what happened.
The point I'm making there is not so much about Ohio State, and really don't care less about those programs.
Yes.
But you've seen many different programs that were canceled all year long, and you've seen it with basketball as well. Even programs like Duke women basketball canceling the season. Obviously, you've seen that on the HBCU side with FAMU doing the same thing. So that's just par for the course. You're going to see games being postponed, canceled. In terms of what I've heard with the conference, speaking directly with Dr. Charles McCullen, that they decided, one of the reasons they decided to play that full 18 games is because they understood that you would have cancellations, and the NCAA has a bylaw that out there in terms of for you to qualify for this year's NCAA tournament, that teams must play a minimum of 13 games. Those can be non-conference games and conference games, including games in the championship. But to be a qualifier for the tournament, you must have gotten in 13 games. So the volume was what the SWAC went with. And so you'll probably see this in terms of that, where you see like North Carolina A&T in the MEAC, where they're playing 2 games basically back-to-back. You'll see that, which is similar to what you see with Hampton in the Big South, where they play games back-to-back, and they've gotten off to a 3-1 start on the men's side, while they're 1-3 on the women's side in terms of being in the Big South, with Hampton losing their last game. They actually were 3-0 going into that matchup. So give you a little more indication of what some teams are going, while you have Tennessee State struggling. They lost a double overtime game that I was able to see. And so they've gotten off to the skids for over on the season in 0-2, 0-3 in conference play in the OVC. Those teams are struggling, just to give you some indication from those non-conference programs that we talk about at the Division I level of the SCS. Notice you don't have the NCAA Division II programs in there, with the CIAA counseling basketball this year with the other men's and women's side, and then the SIAC pushing their basketball season into March. So you won't see those scores all the rest of the season, just giving some people some indication why we have both NIA Division I but no Division II. That's why you have that going on there.
Yes.
But to kind of close out on those thoughts, it gives you some other things that have shared with me in terms of what to look out for, that there is a plan in the SWAC in regards that if they can't get a number of games in, that they have a contingency plan of how they will move towards a tournament type appeal where they'll get some teams in. I'm not necessarily at liberty to share that yet, but as soon as I get the go ahead, I will provide that information to you. But I thought it was important, since you brought it up about COVID-19, that there is a plan about how they can proceed with the tournament, even though games are canceled. The other thing that may be important to some folks out there wanting to know about COVID-19 is that traditionally, basketball teams on the men's and women's side do not necessarily go home for Christmas, as oftentimes they're in tournaments or getting ready for conference. But this year, because of everything that was going on, a lot of programs allowed their players to go home for Christmas, and that's why you probably have this spike of positive tests.
Yes.
In terms of this first week. And so we probably will get out of this picture, and then your next concern date will probably be February, when you get a lot more students
coming back
in terms on campus as schools start to open up for the spring semester. So yes, you're right. On Saturday, you had 3 of the 5 men's teams that were canceled. COVID protocols were the reason. And then on the women's side, you had 2 of the 5. And you'll have that same thing today, as you have 2 of the 4 games canceled on the
already postponed.
Side, also
yes.
2 of the 4 games canceled on the women's side. So in terms of that's what you have on the lookout, and you'll see more of that moving forward in terms of what that looks like. The other thing that I wanted to get out there, a game that was, I thought, of attention to, was the FAMU playing against South Carolina. They really played that game nip and tuck. They did lose 78-71, but that was literally a 3-point game where FAMU had a shot at tying the game late and just missed the shot, and South Carolina was able to move beyond that and get the victory. But FAMU is playing really well, so look for them to see what they do as they get into some conference players. I think they play their first matchups at home this weekend, so it'll be interesting to see what they can get done as they have their final men's basketball season in the MEAC as they enter in the SWAC in 2021, along with the football program and all other sports.
As I said earlier, I believe it was last week when I indicated that I don't think you will have some of the other MEAC schools wanting to allow Florida A&M as well as A&T to leave the conference with the conference trophy. So it'll be interesting to see what type of fight the other schools will put up. The North Carolina Centrals, Norfolk State.
To your point, all the schools are going to fight, but the teams that I would look at in that race would be Norfolk State. They've gotten out to a very solid start. They've played really well.
Yes, they have.
And they're going to be on top of the conference, while North Carolina Central has only played one game, getting a big victory over, played a couple of games. I'm sorry, they did lose their game to North Carolina. Yes. They got that early victory as they opened things up against Southern before they had to go to COVID protocols, coming off of COVID protocols and getting that win against Southern in a lot of ways. That's another team to keep your eyes on. Coach Mouton is excellent coach, has ran their conference in terms of tournament championships and getting the regular season championships as they defeated North Carolina A&T last year for the regular season crown before they were not able to see what they could do in the tournament as it was canceled, as everybody knew. That was pretty much our preimpetus in terms of what we understood would take place with COVID-19, just starting there during that March Madness as everything really changed in the sporting landscape from that perspective. But those are two programs I would keep your eyes on. But I think A&T and FAMU are going to be in the mix. So it'll be interesting to follow. Should be exciting spring season, even with potential COVID-19 cancellations. I think it's one to keep your eyes on, and I'm glad that we get to talk about it right here on B.L.O.K. Sports.
And you mentioned some things, even though we didn't talk about football, but in terms of championships, we did talk about football earlier on in the program, even though we have moved to basketball. But one of the things that I do want to go back to, even though as we look forward, we have 7 weeks before the football season begins, and that'll be in the middle of basketball. And one thing that, until I get an answer, I will probably bring this up on a weekly basis, is with the MEAC in terms of football, with the number of teams that are playing, they only have 4 conference games. They're only playing 4 games for the MEAC in terms of football. The SWAC has 6 games. And with game cancellations that we've talked about in terms of basketball, we're with Dr. Cavill alluding to the number of games that have been canceled thus far and the games that are being canceled today that are not being played because of COVID-19 protocols. But the one thing that I have not gotten an answer on, and maybe you have some information, maybe not, but with the MEAC, you only have 4 games. And with COVID-19 protocol, there's bound to be a game or maybe even 2 game cancellation, even though with the vaccinations, hopefully we will have more people being vaccinated between now and the next 7 weeks. But I've not received any word of the minimum number of games you must play to qualify for the SWAC championship game, or the minimum number of games you must qualify for to play in the MEAC championship game. Have you heard anything to that effect?
No, I have not heard anything. I've told a lot of folks that as football is king, I think right now, really you got to see what takes place with basketball. Basketball is going to be your indication in terms of how realistic that they're even going to go into spring football. So if they're able to muscle through men's and women's basketball out of the MEAC and SWAC, it's going to give you an indication of just how much they're going to make it a goal for spring football and the other spring sports for that matter. I think they're going to try in all earnest to, give the college athletes an opportunity to play in a shortened season, almost as if for football, particularly for the MEAC, it's almost like spring football. But with the number of teams they have going in there, I don't see anything wrong with it in terms of being minimized. And we just understand that's the land where we are. If you're going to try to do something, you just try to get it done. They're taking a unique approach about it. You had some teams that backed out with Bethune-Cookman, obviously, FAMU, which created the less schedules. going forward. And so they get to do a MEAC championship.
Yeah.
And they're going to try to do an FCS playoff. So
Yeah.
I think if they're able to get in there and make a run of it, I think we'll still have our interest, certainly from a analyst perspective. It'll give me something to talk about of what's going on and bringing the news to you and the viewers of B.L.O.K. Sports. But to be honest with you, I think that's an important question to get out there and answer. But I just think it's too early for them to give you a real answer. I think their focus right now is on men's and women's basketball. Once they kind of get through that and get a little closer to seeing if it's realistic that they're going to kick it off in the spring, then you'll start getting an indication about how they plan to proceed, what that looks like. And I think you're going to see them do something that they talked about looking at doing, particularly for the SWAC, in terms that you probably are not going to have makeup games, and they're going to have to create a formula that allows you to say, based on percentage points, who is going to be the winner of a league. And because they're just trying to get it in, I think it's going to be more important that they're able to play some games than just the particular about, how real is this in terms of everybody not playing everybody. I think that's secondary.
Right.
What we do more traditionally in the regular season, in what would be a regular season where everybody would play everybody and you would have your natural tiebreakers.
Yes.
I think you're just going to have to kind of go through it and take this one a bit on the teeth, lips a little bit, hold your lips, and really just pray for the safety, if you would,
more than anything
for
else,
all involved, to make sure that you can get out this as safe as possible. With the same time, giving the college athletes the opportunity to do the things that they love to do within that framework as safe as possible.
Yes, because I know with COVID-19, and take it from me, it's nothing to play with. And we have to make sure that we protect our student athletes more than anything else. And the one thing that we have to remember, the first word that's in that, and it's student. They are students first, and they're athletes second. And we have to make sure that we protect all of the student athletes that come from all over the country to actually play. And but as we look at that, you also have to look at the Alabama States of the world that decided that, you know what, we're not playing any non-conference games, and they have to be in a position to hope that they can make it through the minimum 13 games. Because if they're not in a position
I don't
to make it through those
gonna
13 games, that's...
Well, the first thing is important to talk about is Alabama State and Alabama A&M are not eligible.
This is true. This is
for
true.
the tournament because of
This is true.
the APR sanction.
Yeah,
So you're
I
really
forgot.
looking at
Thank you.
18s. But I think
This is
one
true.
thing that Alabama State is trying to be a good steward of being as safe as possible, at the same time being a good steward of the conference, meaning we're going to try to play a conference schedule for the rest of the conference because the rest of the conference has moved forward. So
Yeah.
I think there's some credit to go to Alabama State for doing that, understanding that we've seen some other schools that done that since they were not eligible for the tournament. For example, I think it was Sam Houston State or whatever saying they're not going to play football or whatever, fall or spring. They played the one game, I think, where they got some money out of it. Would give you some indication there, but because they weren't eligible, they decided not to play.
Yeah, cancel the rest of their games.
Which you can understand. It's plausible, but I think you have to give some credit to Alabama State about pushing forward, about at least having the conference play in there, and giving Mo Williams a chance to kind of get things going and feel for it, and obviously on the women's side as well, because the women are eligible in terms of and they tend to be one of the teams that will be the top part of the conference, making a push for it. So I think there's some ways to look at it a little maybe outside of the box. Another thing that you talked about being safe, I can give you in terms of what I understand. A lot of conferences doing this, but I know specifically in the SWAC that most institutions are doing 3 tests a week for active sports. The sports that are in season, they're doing 3 tests a week. From a conference perspective, I know that you have to be tested 24 hours before the game. And so that means you're going to get a test simply before Friday sometime. before the game on Saturday,
Yeah,
and
that's
you
Sunday.
can't use that test to suffice for both Saturday and Monday. That you're going to have to get another test
That's
before
Sunday.
Monday. So you see that in terms of an indication of what the conference is doing, what individual institutions are doing in regards to making students as safe as possible. And I think that's across the board in regards to it look like. Another thing I can give you some information on is that the schools here at Texas Southern and Prairie View are partnering with the city, and Prairie View has the rapid antigen test that they were able to get sanctioned through their institutional and medical side. So they're going to partner with schools coming in to make sure that if they need to get the test, they can get the test here, that they may not have to do at their home institution. If there's an additional cost involved, they won't have to worry about that. So I think another thing that you're seeing in a conference that is really good and a good indication from a leadership perspective, kudos to Dr. Charles McCullin, is how the institutions are working together to try to make the best of this challenging effort for the conference. And I would surmise that you see the same thing going on in NEAC, although I haven't heard that directly.
Got it. Yes, and that's something for us to keep our eyes open to see, and yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where this year will go in terms of the remainder of the season, because basketball is in season with the number of tests that are going on. And as a matter of fact, out of curiosity, have you received any word in your locale in terms of Prairie View and Texas Southern? At what point in time they're going to allow for instructors or even athletes to be vaccinated? Have you heard anything from that standpoint as far as the state of Texas is concerned?
No, I haven't heard anything in regards to the general population, which would include faculty in terms of the vaccination. I think that's a rollout, and obviously in there in the first phase where you have your frontline workers that are getting vaccinated,
Right.
or at least have the option to do it first, and then they'll move through it. I don't perceive that you'll get much of the general population vaccinated before the summer, just as what I've kind of read and understood in terms of that. I will add into what I said about the athletes that at Texas Southern Prairie View, that the faculty have the chance to get tested in terms of COVID-19 on campus. They also have the ability in a lot of spaces to decide whether they're going to teach in terms of online or face-to-face courses. Prairie View will be coming back to campus and doing both hybrid and face-to-face. At Texas Southern University, we'll follow the same model. We'll do online, hybrid, as well as some face-to-face classes, which will be in the hybrid format. We're back on campus, as you see now, in terms of administrative. We started back officially today, and students will be back, and the rest of the faculty will be back in about 2 weeks as we kick off the semester moving forward in those formats. And Prairie View is similar in terms of what they will be doing in terms of when they get back involved in terms of moving forward with these institutions.
Yes, trust me, my daughters are looking forward to getting back on campus. They love being home, but they are really looking forward to going back to campus and hopefully to actually be in class. They're actually truly looking forward to that, being second semester sophomores. So
yeah, a lot of people are looking forward of when we can get back to that. Obviously, with COVID-19, our biggest
issue is staying safe.
Appeal is, as you said, is about being safe, and that's safety for all involved. Safety for our students, safety for our faculty, safety for our administrators across the board. So one of the things that I know I can say about Texas Southern University, and I would say against other state institutions in the state of Texas, and really across the board in the country, specifically the SWAC, that the administrators, presidents, chancellors, provosts are really doing, and even faculty senate representatives, if you would, are working together in regards to do everything necessary to make the environment safe as possible, but still providing an educational environment that allows our students to succeed. So I'm glad that you gave me an opportunity to express that, but I can sincerely say that that for my role, being a faculty and now being in the administrative side to some degree, that with all the information I received in earnest, that's the direction that I see directly with our institutions.
Gotcha. Well, I tell you what, we've covered quite a bit of information. We've covered quite a few topics on this very first Block Sport show of 2021. And with that being said, we're coming to the end of the show. So, Dr. Cavill, the last word.
Yeah, with that, I want to give kudos to President Hewitt here at Texas Southern University for his leadership that he's done this past fall coming on the board in terms of the interim president role. It's a lot to take place, and I think he's done everything in his capacity to move the university forward. We are still in a position where we had to do online graduation, but we got that under our belt and got it done. So kudos to President Hewitt. Kudos to the provost in terms of Provost Harris, in terms of what he's done specifically on the academic side. So wanted to do that. My alma mater out there as well, Prairie View, our sister institution, rivalry in athletics, and a lot of other ways we partner when you talk about President Simmons in terms of what she's been able to do. We've seen their name in the news in terms of a financial side with the donations, which has been significant. So want to give her kudos on that as well. But really wanted to just kind of close out and say thanks for the leadership of our institution, specifically here at Texas Southern University, President Hewitt, and allowing us to continue to be the vanguard for our students and the educational aspirations of our students, and allowing the faculty to proceed in terms of giving that educational attainment to those students. As we move into 2021, last thing I will say, continue to be safe, continue to do what's necessary to keep yourself safe, wash your hands, social distance in terms of 6 feet or more. Do not be involved in the social gatherings, and do not allow the announcement of vaccine to kind of let your guard down, proverbially, if you would say, but continue to move forward. With that, Happy New Year's to everybody.
Yes.
Make sure, as I said, get your black eyed peas in. I've got mine in because somebody didn't do it in 2020. So I look forward to 2021 being much better. I kid because I care.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you to everybody out there for listening to us today.
Well, I tell you what, thank you very much. And I made sure that I got my cabbage greens and my peas in as I traditionally do each and every year. And to everyone that's out there, as Dr. Cavill said, make sure you just stay safe. And some of the other things that he alluded to was giving kudos to his presidents that are out there. I want to give kudos to from removal of the interim tag to the actual president of Jackson State University. Thank you, President Thomas Hudson of Jackson State University, for leading the university through COVID-19. You are, all of the presidents at all of the HBCUs, we need to really stand up and just say thank you for the job that you've actually done, because each of you have actually led the university, your prospective university, through this period. And we've had very few issues on campus as related to COVID-19. And we have to say kudos to each and every one of you, to all of the athletic directors, and also, even though you're not under that title anymore, all of the sports information directors, even though you're now under a different title or a different heading, but for making sure that the information gets out to us as we report on each college and university. So we have to say thank you for all of the things that you're doing, and we hope and pray that you continue to stay safe and continue to keep all of the student athletes safe during this new year of 2021, because it's not about the game, it's not about the sport, it's about us. and we have to make sure that we continue to stay safe and keep our students safe, keep our children safe. And if we don't, then we won't have a good place to go to speak about. And did you have another
just
point
one
to
thing
add?
before you do your final word, because I wanted you to close, because your point that you made with all the presidents is so
Yes, sir.
spot on. But I also wanted to say thanks to President Hudson. He was on Inside HBCU Sports Lab a couple of weeks ago. So I wanted to congratulate him getting that interim tag removed, and thanking him for coming on the show and giving us some insight of the leadership that you talked about that he's doing at Jackson State University, moving the university forward with all the history. So great point that you make there. And obviously you can check us out on Inside HBCU Sports Lab every Tuesday at 6 o'clock. Check us out on Facebook Live. We'll be moving to YouTube, where you can catch us on tape version, but we'll broadcast live in a short period of time as we'll continue to move forward and looking at some things there. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Dr. Kenyatta Cavill, DrKenyattaCavil. And again, check us out live, 6 o'clock every Tuesday, Central Standard Time, for Dr. Cavill's Inside HBC Sports Lab with Mike Washington and Charles Bishop. And thank you for letting me get that plug in.
Look, any and every time, this is the one thing that we must do. We must support each other. And also some of the other individuals that take part in B.L.O.K Sports is Mr. Eric Moore of the Oneden Group. And you can read all of his commentaries and all of the sports information that he has at the Oneden Group, and it's Oniden, ONNIDAN.com. So make sure that you go and review all of the sports stories that he has, as well as Mr. Lute Williams. He also has stories that he writes about almost every day, am I correct? And it's also on the Oneden Group. So those are individuals that you can also check up on each and every day. And also Mr. Eric Tabor with Albany State with the Gridiron Sports. Just make sure that you support your local HBCU. And if you are an African American that did not go to an HBCU, make sure that you find an HBCU that you can support. Because without you, we may not exist. And with your support, we're in a better position than we were yesterday. So make sure, with my final word, just make sure you stay safe. Make sure you stay safe more than anything else. Stay vigilant. Because if you don't stay vigilant, then, and if you do happen to get, to contract COVID-19, then the one thing I can say is, just like we had the individual on here from Harry Medical School, is that he said, keep your morale high, make sure you eat well, and make sure you exercise. But on top of that, rub a little sunshine on your face. So,
Smile.
and smile. Because if you don't, then you want to make sure you don't stress out your system. Because if you stress out your system, then your immune system can't do the things that it's supposed to do. So stay safe, stay healthy in all cases. And with that being said, that is my final word until next week, next Monday at 2 p.m. And I also have one other thing to say. Stay tuned for our Affairs of State. And that is going to be our political talk show that we are bringing back. And that will be called Affairs of State. So stay tuned for that as we go into the Indiana State Legislature and talk to the black legislators there and what's going on in the state of Indiana. And we'll also bring in others from other parts of the country. So stay tuned as we bring that back up. So you heard it here. You heard it first. So Dr. Cavill, if you want to be a part of that, or if you want to bring in, recommend some of your other, your counterpart, please let me know. Because as you know, we have to have a conversation. And with that conversation in terms of how it affects us and our community, we have to discuss that. Because if we don't talk about it, no one else will. And that's a guarantee. So with that being said, may God bless you. And until we see each other again next week at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on Block Sport on yourstreet.tv. So may God bless you and have a good night.